We are live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the event today. Good to see you, Bill. Good to see you, John. Quick, quick, quick. We've had some very deep discussions just before this, so we're all in a good mood, hopefully. So just to remind everybody here today, this is the AI Human Edge: Winning with Intelligence Technologies on the Field and Beyond, and we'll discuss what that title means and. Specifically, our panelists, Bill and John, will come at it from different angles. Let's just do a quick round of introductions. John, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I see Jeff Rubinow has come from the previous session that I did to this one. Ray Pettit's here. We have an august group with us that, actually dwarf our intelligence bill, so we might be in trouble this morning. So John Thompson, I've been involved in the AI data and analytics space for 38 years, written 5 books, and I carry Bill's suitcase everywhere.
I'll go next. I'm Bill. John and I have worked together twice in our life, and if I had my way with it, I would do it again. All my experience with John has been great. Been great collaboration. By the way, I just see that Eddie Short joined us. So, John, you're really right. The audience has already gotten smarter than us, so it should be a good group. I've written a few books myself. I think the thing I'm most proud of is my teaching. I teach at Iowa State University. I know John teaches at University of Michigan. I think when you get to our age, that's our way of giving back and trying to frame that next generation, prepare them for to contribute and to be thoughtful and use AI and analytics to deliver more responsible and ethical outcomes.
Great. Thank you very much. And a quick introduction from me, Samir Sharma. I've known Bill and John for probably around 5 or 6 years now. Both of them are fantastic guys, although I prefer Bill. But that's just a little joke between us. I run a company called DataZoom. I've been in the data industry now for about 25 years. And yes, I do see a lot of people that I recognize. Thank you for coming on. Look, there is 2 ways to communicate during this, because I know that we do get a lot of fierce communication between the panelists between the attendees. So there's a Q&A function and there's a chat function. So please do use those. I will bring questions in as we speak. There's no fire drills, so we'll be fine. And look, today we're really getting into it in terms of Bill has written, as he mentioned, 7 books. John has written 5 books. John's latest book came out at the beginning of this year. Bill's new book is coming out probably at the end of this year, I think September time. And the title of this webinar today is really about what Bill is launching at the end of September, and and your focus is really sports analytics initially, and hence this title around winning on the field and beyond. Why sports? Why do you think that this is the field that you wanted to go into, apart from the fact that you are deeply passionate about sports, as I know and as I've read in your intro? But just let's get into it.
Yeah, so the book started off really as for sports analytics, and I had been talking to a couple of professional sports teams, organizations, and a couple of very large colleges around how they could take AI and do it to the next level. I've had some concepts around entity propensity models for quite a while. This idea around entity language models is something fairly new with agentic AI and large language models and such. So I've had this passion for sports for a long time. My kids all played sports. I coached sports. But it was really, the epiphany was from one of my reviewers, Renee Lottie, who was reviewing my book, and she was going through it, and she reviewed my previous book, The Art of Thinking Like a Data Scientist, and she's got unbelievable patience to be reading my books, because even I have a hard time reading them. And she looked at me and she gave me a call and said, Bill, you know what you're talking about for sports plays for every profession, every subject matter experts, whether it's nursing or teaching or designing or engineering, or the idea that sports, what's powerful about sports is that the value of an athlete is clearly defined, right? It's been astronomically growing. We know this now in college sports. We know that that with what's called, NIL funds and such, that the value of the human is very clearly identifiable. And they also have what John and I were talking about earlier. They also have a ton of data, what I call objective outcomes observability, which is, I know when a batter swings the bat, did he hit the ball or not? When a basketball player shoots the ball, did he make it or not, right? You have immediate feedback. You have clear definition of value, but you also have tons of performance and behavioral data that sits there that's not really being used. In fact, one of the executives at a large university said, we have all this tons of data, and I know nothing about my athletes.
Wow.
And so that became the impetus. Sports, and it ends up in the book being kind of a foundation piece. It's much, much broader about really to fly in the face that says, hey, AI is going to replace humans. And I'm saying, because I know this is not being recorded by AI, right? I say bullshit to that. I said, AI can help everybody, whether it's a nurse or a social worker or whatever. So that was the impetus and the direction of the book.
One of the things we were talking about earlier, Bill's been generous enough to share some of the book with us and allow us to get a sneak peek of it. And Mark Stuess and I are honored to contribute a chapter to that new book. And one of the things that is really interesting about it is that in the sports metaphor, it's real time. I mean, it's not truly real time, but it's in the moment. Real time happens almost instantaneous at a physics level. But we're talking about in the moment, that you can see, a player's mechanics changing. You can see the speed of moving across the field slowing. You can see the effect of injuries on their performance, and you can intervene. And it's all there in the moment. Now, analytics, as Bill said, in this frame can be applied to almost anything: nursing, manufacturing, supply chain, pricing. But the problem there is that we have massive time lags. We observe an event, we intervene, we watch it play out, we observe the result. And sometimes it's a quarter, a week, a year, a decade. Depends on the nature of the process and the speed of it. And that's why I think this is so important and impactful, is that you can see the entire life cycle happening in real time or in the context of the moment, which I think is great.
So there's a couple of things that you talked about in the introduction. You talked about learning systems, how organizations, and of course, those are dynamic events that are happening if you're looking at sports. But in organizations, dynamic events happen, I don't know, very seldomly. It's sort of, it does happen, but there will be that lag. Sports, as you say, has got I'll come to you in a minute, has got a very, very instantaneous immediacy with it. But you talk about beyond process metric, you talk about adaptive beyond sports, you talk about driven by high impact individuals and dynamic learning and analytics. So in a learning organization, how do we then construct that? How do we then start to build that in a way that it can mirror this sort of near real time, as John just mentioned, and AI can play this bigger role in decreasing that time lag and helping an organization facilitate not only growth or whatever they're trying to do, but actually get that immediacy. So how do we start to build that?
Let me take the first shot, then transition to John, because John said a really key point. In the moment, right? There's certainly analytics in the moment. And that happens if you're a nurse, a doctor, a lawyer. I mean, we all have in these moments. Now, we don't always capture as much data as we should, right? We don't have that objective outcomes observability, not because we couldn't, but in fact, with things like, generative AI capturing all these conversations, we now have the ability to capture more in the moment sort of insights. So we do have these in the moments where a nurse is having a conversation with a patient, and they see, a good nurse can observe when a patient drops something when they don't, and they can probably have a really good feel for that person never going to follow their medication protocol. Right? They know this. But also, what John had talked about earlier too is that in the book we talk about what I call temporal granularity. Actually, that was Wei Lin's term. Wei Lin is our chief data scientist who helped me make sure the book, everything I wrote in the book, I actually can build. Right? I trust my Wei Lin to build this. And Wei said, you got to take into account temporal granularity. Right? There's in the moment, the at-bat, the shot being taken, the hit being made. There's also in the game, right? Do I make a substitution? Do I make a shift? And there's also in the season. And so while you're trying to, for example, mitigate injuries, watching NBA games and being a Golden State Warriors fan, I always dread when I see Steph Curry go down, right? I just know that when he goes down and gets injured, the Warriors' fortunes are pretty much done. So managing his workload, his recovery times and such isn't in the moment. It takes into account the season, making sure that he is prepared for the playoff times and end of the season. So I do think that John raised a really good point, and this really becomes important when we start talking about causality, which is John's sweet spot, right?
Yeah.
Is that we need to make certain we're looking at causality not only in the moment, but across all these other time horizons.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to jump on that Samir mentioned earlier is that, organizations, we do have processes that go, sometimes for years in duration. The life of a company can be over 100 years, and that's a process in and of itself. But what I'm seeing right now, is that we're seeing AI and agents being brought into those moments where it can make a difference. If you look at the tail of business activity, many of those tails, the reason they're tails is that there's unusual activity there. There's errors, there's mistakes, there's, unusual circumstances. And they're often characterized by being low value and low volume. And people say, oh gosh, it's costing us, that tail is costing as much and is taking off the profit of the majority of the things that we're doing in an inordinate amount of time and impact. So where we see AI and agents making a really positive impact is taking care of those unusual situations. It used to be that, agents and they were all rule-based and deterministic. Now with AI and the ability to look at elastic situations, it can take care of more of it. I was talking to a large company, very large one, I think it's like a Fortune 10 company, and they've implemented agents in their procurement cycle where all of those things that took people and weeks to resolve are being done by agents in moments. So, we have to keep in mind as Bill said, the temporal nature of things. Sometimes, the temporal nature is now, and we need to, be aware of that. And sometimes it takes a long time and it's very harmful to the health of the organization. And AI and agents can make a difference in that temporal dimension. So I just want to make sure that we saw the practicality of it that we're seeing in the market today.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to the point around your learning systems, right, Bill? About how those moments are created. But I like the example that you talked about, John. How do we actually make sure that we do it properly? How do we make sure that we've got the things in place that organizations need that will allow them to do what you just talked about, John? Get that agent in that moment, make that decision. If there's a problem, it sweeps in and then resolves that.
I think Bill's book, and I'll let Bill talk about this more, but I just wanted to put a fine point on it, is that most of what the opportunity for us today and the most of the scary part for people is taking the human understanding of processes and data and encoding it into AI and agents. Now that scares people because they're like, hey, if you code my intelligence into this agent, you don't need me anymore. Well, we do need you for higher level thinking and higher level operations. We don't need you to make the decision on, how to process this invoice because it's errantly been disconnected from the processing flow. We need an agent to take care of that. Now, that plays right into Bill's book as well, is that, what you're doing is, and people I don't think are realizing this, is you're taking the in-moment understanding of all the different considerations and you're putting it into something that can make a decision in a nanosecond. Now, coaches are good at that. We call that intuition. We call that experience. We call that, whatever it is. But many people in the heat of the moment, especially in sports, often lose that ability to pull on that historical knowledge. Models don't have that emotionality. They can present to you all the conditions that you think are important, and you can make a better decision on it. So I think that's one thing that we're missing, is that AI gives us a chance to codify knowledge in a more comprehensive, non-emotional way that it can be used in the right context and moment to the optimal decision.
Right. Okay. But and great point. Bill, just build on what organizations need to do. I'm not taking away from what John said, but I think for me, we have tons of things that organizations are doing right now, right? There's LLMs, there's agents being chucked to everybody. There's, John and I spoke about, well, actually one of his beefs is that no one builds the proper analytics platform. So what is it that organizations need to stop doing and start focusing on? Because their architectural design matched with their organizational, resilience is often way apart. It's just, it's kind of those things that are going to be foundational. But how do they do it?
Wow, there's so much. John's points were so great. I want to hit one of John's points before I go back to yours. What John is talking about with the agentic AI example is, let's focus humans in the places where humans drive the most value. How do we do more with less as an organization? Having people do the mundane tasks, free them up to do the important things. I don't want nurses having to, record everything that's being said in a conversation with a patient. For one thing, they might miss stuff, right? I want the nurse to be able to listen and respond and ask questions. And then maybe the item that's recording is whispering little hints about, that sounds unusual. You may want to ask your patient this question, right? So the combination of what I call intelligence analytics, right? The intelligence technologies of large language models, agentic AI, generative AI, and most importantly to me is reinforcement learning, right? Can act as a vehicle that sits kind of like on Yoda on my shoulder, and it's listening to the conversation. It has deep knowledge about the patient and all their predictive propensities. It has deep knowledge about me as a nurse or a doctor or a technician, and it also has deep knowledge about the different treatment aspects. And it can play this role as in the middle, not to replace the human, but to help me be a better doctor or a better nurse or a better technician. So I think John's point is really spot on, is that at the end of the day, and Mark Strauss would smile at this, is that it's about economics, right? How do we do more with less so we can transform that economic value curve? Now, what we've got is these new intelligence technologies that basically have the ability to learn and adapt. And what we're seeing with, I saw a question pop here around hallucinations. Some of these technologies, and excuse me if I go too far with this, so you can cut me off, Samir, is that today they're based on very generic large language models, right? They do statistical averaging, and we get regression to the mean, we get all kinds of problems. But the work that John and Mark have been doing around causal AI, think about if our large language model wasn't just looking at a bunch of general data, but was pulling domain-specific insights and propensity models into the process, so it knew exactly what patients are most likely to respond to what situations, and then it acts more as a contextual matcher than it is a content creator, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. And I, well, John's the expert on causal AI, and maybe it might just be good to kind of talk through causal AI from, as you've written the book, John, just so that people understand what causal AI is and how it's going to be more effective than the kind of, analytics that we do now in most organizations. And maybe you might just want to also touch on that comment that you made, maybe it was the last week or so, about if leaders, if data leaders, or whoever kind of leaders we want to talk about, I hate the saying data leaders, they're all leaders, they're not building the right platforms. What is that you want them to do, and how do you need them to build those platforms?
Sure. Well, a couple words on causal AI, of course, and then we'll go from there. Yeah, 3 years ago, I thought causal AI was going to be the next big thing. And then, of course, Gen AI came and sucked all the air out of the room and has for the last 3 years. But, causal AI is very important. We will never get to artificial general intelligence without the incorporation of causal AI into what I call composite AI and Mark Stoops calls converged intelligence. That'll happen 10 to 20 years from now. I truly believe that.
What is composite AI?
Composite
quickly.
AI is where foundational, predictive AI, causal AI, and generative AI are integrated together into one engine. So when you go in via a prompt window and put in a prompt, you don't care if it's a causal model or a predictive model, logistic regression, or a Gen AI neural network. You don't care. You want the answer. And we have the infrastructure for that now. Most people don't realize they're not prompting a model. Well, they are, but they're prompting an orchestrator model that is tearing the prompt apart and sending it to multiple models. That's the architecture that we will have from now going forward. That's the way the world will work. And most people don't understand that. Causal will just be a component of that engine as we go forward. Now, causal AI is the next step in where we're going in understanding causality. Most people don't realize and understand. They think they understand causality. I put my finger on a hot stove and I burn myself. Okay, putting your finger on the stove burns you. Yeah, that's causality. But when you actually try to model causality mathematically, it's hard to do. Judea Pearl is the godfather, grandfather of all this. He created do calculus 20 years ago. And heaven forbid I should even know how to do calculus, let alone create a new branch of calculus. And Bill, has embodied this brilliantly in his new book. So you can actually see, a situation, a cause, an effect, and you can model it with great certainty. Now, most people are like, oh, well, I know the difference between correlation and causality. I can guarantee you, other than Ray Pettit and a few people on this call, most people do not understand the difference. And in the book, I lay out 17 different characteristics of what causality is and what correlation is not. So causality is the actual mathematical modeling of cause and effect is really what it is.
Okay. I'm just going to cut to a couple of questions that have come up.
Can I ask
yeah, go for it,
one point?
Go for it, Bill.
There's no doubt that the heart of the book, chapter 5, literally sits in the middle of the book, is the chapter that John and Mark wrote about causality. And what occurred to me as I was writing the book, I talk about entity propensity models. So they have a bunch of propensity scores that measure the likely behavioral performance propensities of athletes, right? Who's most likely to respond in this situation late in the quarter? I've got a relief pitcher who's going to come up, just pitched the day before, et cetera. So I got these entity propensity models that are built using causal concepts that John and Mark talk about, right? And I use that as the foundation for my ELMs, or I call ELM, my entity language models, which are language models and genetic. Now I get that what John has just talked about. Now I'm not just gathering random data based on averages. I'm not taking the 400,000 tweets about Taylor Swift and trying to figure out how that applies to my patient. I'm taking hard-coded causal information, applying that to these intelligence technologies, which have the ability to learn and adapt. And so, again, the causal stuff, Gen AI is cool. It's really impressive. But it's kind of like making a dog walk on its hind legs. It's pretty fun and impressive. But I don't want that dog bringing my beer to me.
Well, I don't know. On a hot day, you might. Listen, got some questions. Dan Blake is asking. You also have to have leadership that is open to insights the AI provides, that is counterintuitive or go against their preferred narrative. Are there any thoughts there? I'll leave whoever wants to talk about that.
Yeah, I've been pretty vocal about this for quite some time. Is that I'm at the end of the baby boomer era. I'm kind of a cusper, and and I've worked with a lot of C-level executives that it's time for them to go. They need to retire. Many of those people were in college and they didn't even use a calculator, let alone a computer. So, we won't be able to have widespread implementation of Gen AI and computer technology that's assistive to the human condition until we get rid of the current, crop of leaders.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Let me riff on that. So the reason I started in sports is because I was having conversations with sports executives, professional executives, who knew that being able to identify the potential most valuable athletes be game changers. Identify the next Caitlin Clark, the next Steph Curry, the next Mike Trout, right? These are organizations whose very fundamental foundation is to identify high-performing humans, make sure they reach their full potential, manage their workload, prevent injuries, retain them, et cetera, et cetera. So the concepts work perfectly in sports. The challenge, as John has just laid out, is that while we see this for sports, the people who run healthcare and education and manufacturing and retail and other areas don't think of their employees in the same way. I think the fundamental problem, reason why we have so many executives who are focused on, can I use AI to replace humans, right? I hate the bullshit line that organizations say, well, our employees are our most important asset. The minute things go south, who do they get rid of? The employees, right? So most organizations, 99% of organizations I deal with, still don't understand that the human is what makes this work. They're the source of ingenuity and exploration and creativity and curiosity. They're the ones who can take these tools and do more with them. And so to John's point, as long as we have organizations and CIOs who've been raised sort of implementing SAP systems where I'm going to drive costs out through productivity improvements, this is not about productivity improvements. This is about improving effectiveness and efficiencies and efficacy and creating new ideas and unleashing creativity. Go ahead, Samir.
But you're talking about building an adaptive organization, right? One that doesn't necessarily have to around humans. But that adaptability doesn't need to be in the constructs of the organizations that we have right now, right? So I think it goes back to a couple of things. How do you do that? How do you break down those barriers between processes, people, and tech? And maybe it's the way that you're talking about it in those learning systems, and that, in the moment, so you can reflect very quickly on decisions that you're making. But those, those big organizations, and maybe it's back to what you talked about earlier with your Fortune 10. How are they doing that? How are they instilling that new organizational framework that will give them the ability to adapt, be resilient, but make key decisions that are way out of their kind of normal way of decision making? That's the thing that's very difficult.
Yeah, let's bring back in the concept of time again. In the last 3 years, I've spoken to over 500 companies about AI, Gen AI, traditional AI, causal AI, all of it. And most of those companies are still at a point of they don't understand what to do and how to do it. They're still asking the basic questions. Yeah. So, what we will see, and people in Goose's session were asking the question of what are the barriers to widespread adoption of agents at scale? And my point is we haven't even got to widespread adoption of Gen AI at scale, because people don't know what and how to do it. And then when we talk about agents, we're still experimenting with agents in small areas of the business. So when people ask me when are we going to get to agents at scale, I'm like, we got to get through experimentation first.
Yeah.
So this whole rollout of Gen AI and AI through the organization, while it sounds like everybody's doing it, it's kind of like teenage sex. Everybody's talking about it. Very few people are doing it.
Sorry, Bill, you wanted to comment on that? You had some...
Yeah, bottom line, it's always about economics. Like Mark House right now is just rolling his eyes, right? And economics is really about how do you use your assets to create more value. I've written a book about the data economics, but humans are also very much an economic engine. And sports is very clear. LeBron James is an economic machine. Steph Curry, right? They're economic machines. But inside of organizations, you've got some nurses that are just much more effective at what they do, right? They produce better outcomes. They have, reduced number of falls between their patients, right? Falls in hospitals is a really big pain point, right? Right. So, and you have technicians who are better. You have operators. You have certain operators who are really good at running the backhoe and better than other people. If you know what your employees are better at doing, and then match them to what their most important activities for the organization, you have a chance to elevate not only their effectiveness, but elevate their ability to create value for the organization. But we don't think about humans. We get very process centric, right? We tend to stop and think about, I'm going to use AI to improve this process. Well, what if instead of improving the process, what if I improve the human who is trying to use that process? What if I focus first on the human and really elevate, so that not everybody's an average nurse, but I can take and elevate my best nurses, my best teachers, et cetera. So to me, it really starts with this very dynamic focus on some of my employees are more important than others, right? Don's story was perfect about how to do more with less, right? How do I focus those employees on the opportunities that are most valuable to the organization, that also leverage what they do best? And we don't do that today. We treat people as a homogenous group. And
yeah. No, I agree. I don't think organizations are built for that purpose. Yes, we have to hire people. Yes, we have to put them in roles, but I don't think they are in the same way that you're thinking about it in terms of elevating those people. The idea of elevation is typically around something like let's get the right people who we think, maybe there's a bit of nepotism or whatever, and let's put them on this, fast track to, a massive leadership role. And, I don't know whether those are the right people, because they've never actually fundamentally looked at it in a way that is granular in the way that you're talking about.
Well, and again, the reason why the aha moment for me was sports, I was talking to this athletic director at this large university. And like I said before earlier, he said, I have all this data about my athletes. I have no insights into who's most valuable in what situations, right?
But you could say the same thing about a CEO. A CEO
is
exactly the same thing.
It's exactly
the same thing. Teacher, about anybody.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, you could capture all the data about. I keep coming back to nursing. Both of my daughters-in-laws are nurses, right? There's tons of data we could be capturing about the nurse. Capturing through the AI process, the conversations they're having with the patients. I got cameras around who are telling me, which my nurses are most effective in what situations, right? I have this ability to gather tons of data around all of my frontline employees, so I can help them elevate to their natural level of greatness and match them to what is most valuable, not only to what they do well, but also what's valuable to the organization. So it isn't just sport. It's available to anybody who thinks first that my most valuable economic asset are humans, are my employees.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it. Sorry, John. Just a quick one.
Yes, sir.
As we go back and think about some of those management thinkers and Kotler and others, and there's a discussion going on now about value mapping. Why don't organizations still know how to value map? Are they so crap at it that they don't understand what that means, and to identify that value chain? Management theory has been going on for years. Isn't this something that we do all the time? In terms of what I mean, I certainly do when I go into organizations and map the value across the value chain. So I just think there's fundamental things that need to be achieved in organizations that are still so immature that layering in AI and Gen AI and agents is just going to cover the crap, and it's just going to give us more crap.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're missing is that there's, and not just us, I'm not calling anybody out here, is the world is missing, is that AI projects are not technology projects. AI projects are not data projects. AI projects are transformation projects. Mm-hmm. The only way AI projects make a difference is if you take your technologists and you marry them with your subject matter experts and you redefine business. You redefine business based on how business really works. Right. What I've found over the last 10 years is that by simply doing what Bill has advocated, and Bill taught me this, 30 years ago when we were at Metaphor, is that if you look at the data will tell you how the business operates. 99% of businesses don't operate in a way that would mirror what their real operations are. So if you take your technologists and your people that understand the data, the algorithms, the mathematics, the models, you marry them with subject matter experts, you do a simple assessment of how the business really works, and you revise the processes and make them data-driven and AI accelerated, you have optimized your business. So these are not technology projects, and unless you understand that they're transformation projects, you will never get the value from them.
And I think, Eddie brings up a really good point here as you're discussing it, and I'm reading his response to you. Yes, AI projects are transformation projects, but the point is with transformation is there is an end in mind, where now we are talking a change as usual, continuous adaptation state. I don't know whether organizations can be set up like that right now, in the way that their behavior, in the way that their culture, in the way that they operate, and the models of, as you talked about, processes. We're so 1980s still, to me. It kind of feels like we're never moving. Go on, Bill.
I think we're 1950s. I think we just came out of World War II.
1950s.
The command and control structure of our organizations are throttling ingenuity and creativity in the organizations, right?
Right.
Marvelous book written by General McChrystal called Team of Teams, right? And how they basically in the I think it was the Afghan battles, the traditional top-down command and control structure was people were dying. And so he created agile teams that were actually able to make decisions on their own. The problem we have today is that a lot of senior management's not willing to push responsibility and authority down to the front lines and give them autonomy to make decisions. And by the way, when you talk about a learning organization, Samir, and you've hit this several times, I think this is really a key point. You can't learn if you're not willing to try and fail at different things. And most organizations really struggle with failure. Think about how you learn sports, right? How I learned to hit a three-point jumper, right? I missed a whole shitload of three-point jumpers before I figured out what the right arm angle was and why a three-point shot was different than a two-point shot from a mechanics perspective, right? So sports is engineered, you learn through failure, and we don't have that kind of acceptance of failure. Now, I know there's some cases where I don't want my nurse making, I'm going to try this combination of medicines on this, right? But I do want the nurse be empowered to look at a situation and say, this patient's in a situation. Here's an example I came across, right? So you got a student who's struggling with math. They got a big math test coming up. And so you bring in a math tutor, and the math tutor is trying to explain these different things. And the math tutor realizes halfway through, the problem isn't math. The problem is anxiety with taking a test. The math tutor is exactly the wrong person to be put into that situation. The math tutor should be replaced with somebody who can help the student understand how to manage their anxiety for taking a test. And so you want to be able to have humans who can diagnose a situation and realize, wait a second, this is not right. You need somebody else. I need to take a different approach, right? So I can learn as I interact. And maybe I've tried some math things and it hasn't worked because my math things haven't addressed the anxiety challenges.
It's true. I want to jump back, in the chat that I've got over here in the window. Eugene typed in something quite some time ago
hallucinations.
Hallucinations are a problem. And I want everybody on this call to take a deep breath, get into the lotus position, and think about hallucinations are a feature. Hallucinations are not a bug. They will never go away. They are not a problem. They are a reality. We need to manage hallucinations, not try to eliminate them. And, as long as you're using a Gen AI, large language model, or any of these transformer architectures, they are going to hallucinate. That's all there is to it.
Let's face it, humans hallucinate all the bloody time anyway, right? So,
I'm hallucinating now.
Right? I don't know what you've taken, John, but I'll take a sip of water right there. There are some practical things that I want to get back to. Gus has asked a question a while back, and I do want to bring it up. mainly because it takes us back to a certain thing that is around the data piece. So given that AI agents are known to hallucinate, we've just talked about hallucinations, so I thought it was a good segue, or generate inaccurate outputs. Do you believe they can still play a meaningful role in reducing dirty data, or might they risk introducing new forms of data quality issues?
Both. I think the answer is both.
Okay, both.
Next question.
Okay, there we go. Well, I think Gus's point is that, yeah, you know, an agent can help reduce that amount of bad data across an organization, but, you know, also reintroducing some kind of hallucination in that mix will then embed different kinds of outcomes, or, you know, bugs or whatever you want to call it.
I do think the short answer is true. It is both. But, you know, I have conversations, I have this conversation more than most, actually, is that when I talk to corporations, they're like, well, we need to get our data straight before we, you know, start using AI. And I'm like, you're absolutely wrong. You need to start using AI on your data. Now, of course, AI is probabilistic and it will make mistakes and it will get it wrong, but it'll get 80% of it right. And you can bring in human in the loop to fix the other 20%. Now, the other thing about it is that people are not thinking about this is that, okay, everybody wants to talk about bias. Oh, there's bias in the data. There's bias here. There's bias there. The world's biased. Get over it. That's just the way it is. Now, if you want to analyze data that has a bias that you are excited about, generate synthetic data and add it into the real data set to have the world that you want to be represented. You know, if you want Steph Curry to hit 100% of his three-point shots, then generate the data, put it in, and then analyze it. Or take a subset and beef it up that he only hits 100% of it, and then analyze it that way. This whole idea that there's bias in the world, oh gosh, so what? You know, I grew up in the United States in the Midwest. I have certain preconceptions and notions of how the world works. Samir lives in London but hangs out in Slovenia all the time. He has certain preconceptions. Bill's just old, so we know that his mind is, his mind frame is way old. So, you know, he has biases. Yeah, of course.
Bill, you can respond to that. You can respond to that.
John is spot on. I am old, right? But, you know, with old comes hallucinations. The conversation on hallucinations is interesting. So the class I taught at Iowa State, I think it was the very first class at Iowa State to mandate the use of Gen AI tools in my class. And I knew very well that, as you said, hallucinations are to be embraced, right? When you type in a question and it gives you an unusual answer, you should always ask it for, well, what's your rationale? So maybe that is an outlier that you should be considering. You know, maybe hallucinations could be, quote unquote, creativity of the system. It just came up with some random thing, threw it out there. But ask it. Don't just believe it. In fact, don't believe anything you get told. Always ask, what's your rationale? Show me the sources, right? Embrace the 7 questions of Socrates before you said, John was Plato, but, you know, the 7 questions of Socrates, and make certain that what you are getting from that is actually valid, or as I understand the rationale. Let me give you an example of a little exercise I did. So I had my students go out. I said, I want you to find 5 people who voted for somebody different than you voted for president. I want you to find 5 people. And I want you to ask them, not why did they vote for them. I want you to ask them to list the rationale for why they voted for that person. What was your rationale, right? Why did you think that was the right person given our situation? When you start getting down into rationale, you start learning you see these connective tissues. Oh, we're all looking for somebody who can be a change agent, who can actually help bring people together, right? Well, whatever that might be. Always get down to the rationale. The human is not only, you know, in the middle, right, in the loop. The human is still responsible. It still owns responsibility, which is why I like to talk about not human in the middle, but AI in the middle as a tool to help me in my job I got to do in my conversations and such.
So, Bill, the chat, we've all described and understand that you've actually studied with Socrates.
Yeah.
In
fact, you taught Socrates.
He was a really good student, but he just kept missing the seventh question. He had six. I said, Socrates, dude, you got to look at sources of the data. What's wrong with you?
I thought he was a good Brazilian football player. Sorry, soccer to you. Soccer to you.
You know that I had a most excellent adventure with him. So
I'm just going to go back to something on the chat that Dan Blake mentioned. And I think it goes back to this human element that we've talked about. And the question or the statement, well, there's a question there as well. Given that organizations are inherently run by humans, what are the common fears and challenges we need to address when trying to transform with AI properly that you have seen, and how have you tackled them?
Yeah, I think that, I feel that, I've said this 1,000 times, maybe even more, is that we don't really need to fear AI. We control AI, we train AI, we teach AI to do things, we tell it can't do things, we stop it from executing in different ways. So AI is our servant. AI is under our control.
So
and we should be thinking about is that we should be elevating the human condition and the things that we ask people to do. AI does rote, repetitive, boring things that people don't like to do. One thing that we haven't talked about here is trust. The trust contract between employees and employers was probably destroyed at about 1963 and has never been rebuilt. So we could do a much better job as leaders. We could do a much better job as leaders in engendering trust in our workers, in our employees, that we are going to have them do the things that they are the best at. And we are going to use AI to take away drudgery, boredom, and, just droll work. That's what we should be focused on. We should not be focused on trying to get rid of employees. Because if you look at just a simple thing, if you look at the number of people that are enrolled in math and science programs in universities around the world, if we graduated all of them, we'd have about 1/10 of what we need.
John, I love this, this focus on getting rid of employees. Imagine if some baseball executive said, wait a second, we could save a lot of money if we only fielded 8 players instead of 9. Right? You would save money, right? You probably wouldn't win very many games, but you would save money, right? And so you're right, is that really taking the time to understand what do your employees do best, and then matching them to them, right? My son was a relief pitcher. Do not make him a catcher. Trust me, do not make him a catcher, right? Right? You find out what they do best, and you put them in position to be successful. Anybody who's ever coached sports, I know, John, you did, and some of you might have as well. When you're coaching kids, especially when I was dealing with Little League, I always made sure I understood what the kids were good at doing, and I put them in positions so they could be successful. I didn't put a kid at second base who couldn't handle ground balls. That wouldn't build his confidence. It wouldn't his parents yell at me about putting him at second base, and I did once, and the first 2 ground balls that went right past him, right, and it destroyed his confidence. It wasn't about winning the game. It was about building the confidence, trust, and capability of that student. Right, so that's what we should. Go ahead, John.
I agree. I had a young lady, and she was like 8 or 9 years old. She was the best striker I'd ever seen. She was great. What'd she want to play? Goalie. So, we put her in goal, and we set up a play where we ran it 2 or 3 times a game where she ran the entire length of the field and scored. But she wanted to be in goal. And we thought, okay, but we wanted her to have opportunities to shine and use her striker abilities. So it worked for everybody.
That's brilliant. That's creativity, right? That's creativity, understanding the human and putting them in a position that they can be successful.
Can I just go back to something that you said, John, earlier about this trust contract? And something that keeps nagging me in the back of my head is the way that organizations are structured now in this very top heavy. I know that we need to get, they're trying to get lean or whatever, but typically you've got a lot of middle management, you've got those obviously people out on the front lines, you've got the execs, but I don't feel that the organizations of today are ready to onboard the changes that they need to make from an employee perspective, and to provide the tools to those employees to actually become the next super duper prompt engineers who can use those decisions in that moment in order to drive whatever strategic objective they've got. So this is the challenge I see as a much greater need instead of the technology, because the actual organization needs to be blown up and redone. But I don't think people are really going to take that on board, because you know, simply, as you said earlier, getting rid of all those people who were there in terms of being there for, 40, 50 years and have never touched a computer or whatever. How do we make that happen seriously? Because it's really bugging me, this whole idea of the pace of change that we're going through, but organizations are way behind on this stuff. Sorry, go on, Bill.
It's going to be, by the way, Eddie Short just mentioned something about HR, right?
Yeah.
HR has been one of the greatest failures in corporate history, right? They're not about development. They're about risk mitigation and trying to reduce lawsuits, right? It's been a total failure all the way around. But I think, going back to your question, when will organizations do this? It'll be like Moneyball. Somebody will do it first, and they'll get competitive advantage from it. And they'll start kicking people's asses, whatever industry they're in. And somebody's going to look around the corner and say, why is that group kicking our butts, right? Because, hey, we're focused on lean. We're focused on lean. They're focused on intelligence, right? We're focused on shrinking processes. They're focused on reinventing processes through re-engineered people and such. So I do think that what's going to happen, it's not the first mover who makes something happen. John Morrill, if you're on the phone here, you would understand, right? It's not the first mover. It's the second follower who says, oh my gosh, this is what the Moneyball factor, right? This Oakland A's did this and it worked great. Who was next? The Boston Red Sox, right behind them, right?
Just like that scene in Moneyball where the general manager of the White Sox or the Red Sox is telling Brad Pitt, the first guy through the wall always gets bloody. Then the second person is the one that takes it to the nth degree. That's the way it works. And to bring back in, I keep banging on about time. Bill and I have seen this over and over again. We've built strategic systems that have helped companies have dramatic competitive advantage. Do they want to talk about those? No, never. So, the wins are always hidden in culture and business.
Absolutely.
So it takes a while, and it takes people like academics and others who are on the sidelines watching and going, why are these three companies breaking away? Because they're not going to stand up and talk about it. So you have them, making the difference and running away from the pack. You have some external observer observing it and then reporting on it, and then other people picking it up. So this is a decades-long process.
It's a long play right now. Okay, we're coming up to the hour. I know Bill's got to go soon, so just in wrapping up, just give us a
group hug.
Kumbaya, my lord, kumbaya.
Oh dear me, I forgot what I was going to say now. No, just in wrapping up, I know that we've got a couple of moments here. Look, you've got a picture of you and Socrates now. We've got it.
Look at the chat.
Gen AI has really quickly done that. Just sum up where you think we're heading, what you think the future is for organizations, and on the curve of where we are now, what is the next thing that organizations need to do to improve themselves?
Let me go first, because I want the older statesman to have the last word.
Yeah. Okay.
So, I want to say that, I think all of us here, all the attendees and the three of us are techno optimists and AI optimists. The future is going to be better than the past. The things that we're working on are going to improve the human condition, and it's all going to get better. So, I know I've taken it out of CEOs and I've made fun of different people, and I stand by all that. I'm a snarky person, and I really believe that's all true. But in the end, the arc is bending towards improvement. So, be optimistic. It's going in the right direction.
Thank you.
John, I couldn't have said it better. The word that pops to mind for me is the word hope. I really believe that if we expose people to what the realm of the possible is and how they can do things different, that there would be hope that everybody has. I mean, I think part of the problem we're having as a world today is that some people feel hopeless. They feel like they've been put into a box. What they do well is not valued anymore. We need to break those boxes and give people hope about a better tomorrow and show them how tools, AI tools, can help them to reach more of their potential, to live a more fulfilling life, to have, to create a better. I mean, we all, I believe, live in a world where we want to leave the world better for our children and grandchildren, right? It's all about that. And I think that's, applause to you, Samir, and hats off to you, John, for constantly giving back, right? That is what I think we do as an organization. And the day you stick me in the ground, that is going to be my motto. I'm going to always look to give back for as long as I can, because at some point in time, I won't be able to. And I truly believe that when I come up to my maker, there's going to be a question about, my ultimate success of my life is not what I've taken, but what I've given.
True.
Thank you very much.
True.
And I think that's fantastic. And human potential is what we should celebrate. That's one thing that I've got from today's conversation. So thank you very much to Bill, John. It's been fantastic. I love the snarky attitude, John. I've always loved it. Bill, I love your wisdom and everything that comes with it. And I just wanted to thank you both for giving me your time, sharing your experiences, and to everybody who attended. Thank you for all of your comments. It's been amazing. And I just loved it. Group. So thank you. Yeah,
great time.
Fantastic.
So much fun. Really grateful. Yeah. Thanks, Samir, for setting this up.
Pleasure.
Let's not take as much time in between the next one.
No, we won't.
Amen.
We won't, for sure.
Amen.
Thank you so much.
Great day and evening, everybody. Bye-bye.
Yeah, wherever you are.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.